Hi, thanks for joining me on Tech with RKM. Today's story is one of the wildest pieces of AI infrastructure news this year. Google is rationing Gemini compute to Meta. Yes, you read that right. Google is telling Meta you cannot have all the Gemini API capacity you asked for. We'll look at what actually got rationed and why this is the first time a hyperscaler has publicly throttled another hyperscaler, and the contrarian read on what this means for every smaller AI buyer. By the end, you'll understand why the rental API era for frontier models might be ending. Okay, let's dive in. Financial Times broke the story on June 28th. Bloomberg picked it up the same day. The facts are these. Google notified Meta back in March 2026 that it could not deliver the full requested Gemini API capacity. The restrictions got formalized this week. Meta internally told staff to make more efficient use of AI tokens. Let that land. Meta, the company with one of the largest GPU fleets on the planet, with their own Llama family of open weight models, with billions of dollars to spend, is now in the position of being told to use tokens carefully because their supplier, Google, cannot provide more. Three things to anchor on. One, this is not a billing issue or a contract dispute. It is a pure supply problem. Google does not have enough Gemini inference capacity to satisfy demand from all its customers, even big ones, even ones who would gladly pay more. The fundamental constraint is silicon. Two, it is the first time a hyperscaler has publicly throttled another hyperscaler. Meta is not just any customer. They are a peer in compute infrastructure. They have AWS contracts, they have on-prem fleets, they have their own data centers. When Google says no to Meta, the message to the broader market is nobody is too big to be capped. Three, Google is simultaneously placing a massive bet on supply expansion. They have committed roughly $920 million per month, or about 30 billion total over 3 years, for 110,000 processors hosted by SpaceX through xAI's infrastructure running from October 2026 through mid 2029. So they know the demand is real. They are scrambling to add supply, but the existing customers are getting rationed in the meantime. Let me walk through the timeline. March 2026, Google internally tells Meta their requested capacity is not deliverable. April through May, Meta starts internal token efficiency programs, trying to do more with less. June, the restrictions formalize publicly. Late June, the FT story breaks. In parallel, Google has been building toward the SpaceX xAI-hosted compute deal, which gets disclosed alongside the Meta rationing news. The timing is not coincidental. Google is publicly saying we cannot satisfy demand, and here is how much we are spending to fix it. So in the next few minutes, I'll cover three threads: the market structure implication, the export control parallel, and what this means if you're building anything on frontier APIs in 2027. Okay, the market structure implication first. If Meta is being rationed, every customer below Meta in size is implicitly hostage to Google's wafer allocation. AWS, Microsoft, Azure, and Google Cloud all sell Gemini access to their customers. If the underlying capacity is constrained, those resellers can either ration their own customers, raise prices to discourage usage, or quietly deprioritize new signups. We've already seen rate limits tighten on Gemini Flash through cloud reseller channels in May and June. The historical parallel here is interesting. In the cloud era, capacity was treated as effectively infinite. you signed an Azure contract, you got an SLA, you scaled to whatever you needed. The cloud providers handled all the supply problems. AI broke that abstraction. Now the supply chain matters because GPUs cannot be magically conjured. A 2-year fab cycle means today's shortage is the result of decisions made in 2024, and today's purchase orders will not deliver until 2027 or 2028. That changes the game for everyone. If you're an enterprise building production AI, you are now exposed to wafer-cycle risk. You should have a multi-vendor strategy. You should have an open source fallback for capability you cannot easily replace. You should have negotiated capacity commitments rather than pay as you go for anything mission critical. The pay-as-you-go cloud era is gone for frontier AI inference. The export control parallel is the second thread. The US government's approach to AI for the last 2 years has been chip export controls, restricting NVIDIA and others from selling certain GPUs to certain countries. Today, what Google is doing to Meta is fundamentally the same mechanism, but commercial instead of regulatory. You may have demand, you may have money, but you cannot have capacity because someone decided you cannot. The infrastructure is becoming a politically managed resource, even when no government is involved. The contrarian thread no one is hitting is this strengthens the case for open weights. If you cannot reliably get Gemini API capacity, the alternative is downloading Llama or another open weight model and running it on whatever GPUs you can buy. Meta literally publishes Llama. They are using Gemini for capability gaps. If those gaps narrow, Meta has less reason to use Gemini at all. The companies with strong open weight programs, Meta, Mistral, Alibaba Quen, gain leverage every time a closed API provider runs out of capacity. The proprietary frontier API providers, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google's own Gemini become structurally fragile because their growth is bounded by silicon, not software. Third thread, what this means if you're building 3 concrete moves. 1. Audit your provider concentration. If more than 70% of your AI spend is on one provider, you are exposed. Diversify even if it costs 10 or 15% margin in the short term. 2. Model open source candidates for your core workloads. You may not need to switch today, but you should know what would happen if you had to. 3. Get capacity commitments in writing with penalties if not delivered. Pay as you go is for prototypes. Production agentic workloads in 2027 need reserved capacity. And specifically about Google's response, the $30 billion SpaceX hosted processors deal is fascinating because it shifts Google away from being a pure cloud provider toward being a downstream customer of xAI. Elon Musk's company is hosting compute that Google then uses to serve Gemini to enterprise customers. The chain of supply has a Musk dependency in it now. That is the kind of structural shift that becomes obvious in hindsight, but is easy to miss in the moment. Quick recap. Google rationed Gemini API capacity to Meta starting March, formalized this month. First public hyperscaler-to-hyperscaler throttle. Meta is now using tokens carefully. Google simultaneously committed $30 billion for SpaceX hosted processors. The rental API era for frontier models is over. Open weight programs gain leverage. Audit your provider concentration before 2027. Tomorrow we cover something almost as wild. OpenAI launched GPT 5.6, codename Sol, but only 20 companies in the world have access. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Drop a comment with how exposed your stack is to a single AI provider. See you tomorrow.